the Atari Lynx was an incredible handheld for its time. It released just a few short months after Nintendo's Game Boy, and it seemed to eclipse their main rival in every technical category. A color screen, arcade-like graphics, a staggering amount of buttons, and games that appeared to rival Nintendo's mainline console, let alone the handheld. But the Lynx's massive size and battery-hungry nature, along with a library of games that was, well, tiny, it kept it from achieving what it set out to do. Originally dubbed the Handy and created by Epyx, the Lynx was picked up by Atari and was going to usher in a new generation of market dominance for the company. But again, it was never meant to be. But with all that said, there is no doubt that quite a few of the games on the Atari Lynx were ambitious and graphically impressive, especially for the time. The Game Boy, while excelling in gameplay and value, looked ancient in comparison to the large, colorful graphics of Atari's offering. And I was always floored by what I was seeing the Atari Lynx pull off. So in this video, I want to show off a few graphically impressive games for the Atari Lynx. The games that make you stop and appreciate just what the console had been capable of. So sit back, relax, and let's get handy with the Atari Lynx. First of all, I want to discuss Double Dragon. This game was an arcade smash hit, and we absolutely adored it in my household. It didn't matter if it was the NES or 7800 version, we ended up playing a lot of Double Dragon. And my family didn't play many games together, but for some reason we loved bashing skulls as a family. Crazy to think about, honestly. But the Atari Lynx version of Double Dragon is just incredible to behold. The graphics look as close to the arcade as almost any console I've ever seen. It puts our NES, and obviously the underwhelming 7800 version, to shame. The sprites are massive and stand almost as tall as the Lynx screen itself, and the environments are familiar to the arcade version as well. Now they aren't perfectly pulled from Double Dragon's arcade machines, but it's honestly pretty darn close. The game looks incredible, especially if you're viewing screenshots or watching other people play for a few seconds at a time. A true graphical achievement on the handheld. So it's a real shame that the game, well, it plays horribly. Everything is far too zoomed in, and you start to realize that you'd rather have more room to function and work than to have such big, beautiful sprites. And the game is slow to play. Painfully slow. The button response is abysmal, and it's hard to have any success in doing the moves that you want to do. So you end up just hammering the punch or kick button and hoping for the best. I would go with nearly any other version of Double Dragon, if you want the best gameplay experience. But graphically, there is no denying that this version put the Game Boy version to shame. And I think that this was the main priority on the Lynx. While Nintendo had a gameplay first mantra, Atari seemed to push impressive graphics and technical achievement over all else. But hey, it got me talking about their games today, so maybe it worked to an extent. Nah, I'm sure they would have rather sold millions of units. Still, Double Dragon looks great on the console, and is still impressive to this day, as long as you don't have to play it. Next, we have a very early title on the Lynx, and that's Blue Lightning. And the whole thing appears to be a sort of tech demo for the Atari Lynx. I've always really enjoyed titles like Afterburner, Star Fox, and Radar Lock on the 2600. And Blue Lightning is mostly like these games and up my alley. And unlike the last game we discussed, this game is actually fairly fun to play. So we have a graphically impressive game that plays well on the Atari Lynx. Awesome. Now you might look at the game and think, well, yeah, it's cool, but what makes it so impressive? Well, you have to put yourself in the time period to give it a little context. This was released in 1989, and the Game Boy had nothing that could touch this game visually. It made for a great comparison piece. You could have this awesome color handheld with incredible graphics, cool scaling effects, and explosions, or you could drop blocks on a green and black screen. With some better marketing and awareness, the Lynx could have really been a contender. But back to Blue Lightning. It looks like it could hold its own with just about any console port of the time, even with some of the 16-bit Genesis stuff that was cutting edge. Now, of course, it is scaled down a bit from Afterburner-type games, but my point stands. This game had a wow factor, and even playing it today makes me think about how amazing it was for its time, and the fact that it's fun to play is just a cherry on top of this incredible-looking sundae. Hard driving is a game I wanted to bring up, because while it looked impressive for its time, well, we always kind of knew that it looked like crap. But 3D was such a novelty that it felt like the future of video games. So anytime the Sega Genesis or Super Nintendo released with something three-dimensional, well, we took notice. And such was the same with hard driving, and the fact that there was a port on the Lynx was just mind-blowing. And all things considered, this game wasn't horrible looking. Again, it feels more like a jab at Nintendo and a selling point than a fun game. Look, we have a 3D game on the Lynx. What does Nintendo's Game Boy have? Baseball? Don't make us laugh. But the truth is, hard driving is a slow, slippery piece of crap on the Lynx. I'm starting to notice a pattern here. The most graphically impressive games, well, they also tend to be the worst. And I think it's because so much of the Lynx's power is being used to render the graphics, and there isn't much left over for gameplay. I tried really hard to gather footage of hard driving for this video, but man, it's so difficult to play and get used to, well, I just had to give up. You can see enough here to get the idea of why it was such a graphically impressive game for its time, and for the consoles that it was on. But I just recommend looking at the game in this video and passing it up. It's a choppy, flat-colored polygonal mess that is just awful to play, especially in 2025 and beyond. Electrocop is a game we recently covered in an Unreleased 7800 game video, and you should check that out if you haven't already. But it was also a game that was released on the Atari Lynx, and it was quite ambitious. Again, it was an early Epyx game, and it had an awesome intro, a deep story, well, for a 1989 handheld, and a behind-the-back three-dimensional form of gameplay that sees you taking the Electrocop through various facilities to destroy robots. And unlike some of the other games on this list, it manages all this, the large sprites, the vivid backgrounds, the three-dimensional environments, without sacrificing gameplay. While it won't be everybody's bag, I dare say that Electrocop is quite good, and was innovative for its time. You typically don't see adventures like this on handheld consoles of the time, and people who would have picked up Electrocop in the early 1990s would have been really impressed. Even today, if you're willing to take your time and play this game the way the developers intended, you'll find an adventure that's more than just a pretty face. It's a cool, action-packed title with fun little Atari arcade classics thrown in for kicks and giggles. Electrocop? Well, it has it all, and it's a pretty good-looking game for the Atari Lynx, not to mention an impressive all-around game at that. And I want to finish with a game that many people will be familiar with, and that's Shadow of the Beast. When it was released in 1989, it was quite the striking game. With its many layers of parallax scrolling, you would think concessions would have to have been made in bringing it to the Lynx. And you're absolutely right. It's pared down a fair bit, but that doesn't make it any less impressive. There are still a few layers of parallax scrolling, along with the tight, challenging gameplay and incredible environments that feel alive and expressive to the player. Shadow of the Beast is by far the least impressive game on this list, but the fact that it was ported, and successfully I might add, to the Atari Lynx is a feat in and of itself, and was another achievement that Atari and Lynx developers could claim against the puny Game Boy. As far as gameplay goes, this might be the best playing game on the list, but it requires a ton of trial and error to progress, at least in the beginning. And any game that uses Cthulhu as the first enemy in the first level, well, it's okay in my book. I think if there is any one game from this video and this list that you should try, it's gotta be Shadow of the Beast. Not only does it look really good for the hardware and for the year that it was released in, but it's also just a good game in general. It's the total package, and I'm not talking about Lex Luger. And there you have it. 5 graphically impressive games on the Atari Lynx that showed off how technically superior it was to Nintendo's Game Boy. But we all know that the technology, the color screen, and the impressive games don't make a console worth owning and playing, and history will prove that. The Game Boy trounced the Lynx and all other competitors that it came across. It didn't matter how advanced your handheld was, it didn't matter if you had the name power of Atari, or even Sega behind it. The Game Boy had it where it counted. Quality games, an affordable price, and the ability to run longer on less batteries. Honestly, that's how Nintendo solidly defeated Atari, Sega, and most other competitors in the 80s and 90s. While everybody else was trying to win the technology race, Nintendo was pushing out fun and innovative games that people just wanted to play. But the Lynx was still, and is still, very cool, very impressive, and very much worth owning and playing. Out of this list, I highly recommend Electrocop, Shadow of the Beast, and even Blue Lightning. But Hard Drivin' and Double Dragon are a duo of games that you should stare at but never touch. They just aren't fun. But you've heard what I have to say, now I want to hear from all of you. Do you like any of the Lynx games we covered? Are there any other graphically impressive Lynx games that we should pay attention to? What Lynx games should we cover on the channel next? Let me know about all this and anything else you have to say in the comments down below. Also, check out the Discord, social media, and all that stuff. But before you do, please leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. We cover everything Atari, so if you like this video, you may be interested in these unreleased Atari 7800 games that we covered last time. Anyway, it's time to end the video. I've been the 7800 Pro Gamer, a man who is portable and able to fit in your pocket for videos on the go, and I'd like to thank you all for watching. And as always, remember to stay classy, Atarians.
I like Lynx, the screen is bigger!
I like Lynx, more can play at the same time!
Lynx has 16 bytes. I mean bits!
I like Game Boy.
3 other